from the Mutual Broadcasting System. This is STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. Now, retired Marine Intelligence Officer and globally recognized risk expert Hal Kempfer.
Welcome to STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. And now I'm going to talk about something that's probably the biggest story out there, which is this huge deadline. Certainly the not implied but very stated threat that the United States has made towards Iran and its regime to either come to an agreement or to face some pretty dire consequences. In fact, I'm going to have to say, in my memory, what I saw was probably the most expletive-filled statement by a U.S. president probably in the entire history of the United States. It was rather clear that Donald Trump was a bit peeved with the Iranians, and he used some rather graphic language in a text to make his displeasure very clear. So anyway, let me talk about this. You may recall that President Trump had set a 2-day deadline. I believe it was originally 2 days, and then it went to 10 days. I think it was actually more than 2 days, and then 10 days. That was supposed to end Monday, October 6th, and then it got extended to what is essentially 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, or 5 p.m. Pacific Time on Tuesday, April 7th. And if that doesn't happen, then all hell is supposed to break out, whatever that means. One of the discussion items was that basically we could, quote, take out Iran in one night. I'm not quite sure what that means. I have heard some rather dire expectations out there that, is he talking about using nuclear weapons on Iran? It's not quite clear. I don't think any nuclear weapons, but I think the idea is that there'd be a very dramatic bombing strike campaign of some sort that could hit the whole country. Now, he has threatened to hit power plants, to literally turn off the lights of the country. We've already hit one major bridge. He has threatened to hit other major bridges. If you're familiar with the topography, the geography of Iran, you realize it has a lot of mountain ranges, and therefore it has a number of bridges. And if you start dropping bridges all over the country, you could literally shut down big chunks of Iran because they've just got a lot of bridges, period. So that's one threat that's out there. And now there's something I should mention. If this targeting, as was said with the bridge that we hit, was tied to a specific military purpose, if it was tied to stop their defense or military industrial capability, or to stop movements of military personnel or equipment, or support of a military installation, or anything tied to a legitimate military purpose, then under the laws of armed conflict, it would be considered legitimate targets, as long as it follows a rule of proportionality. In other words, it's not something that's completely disproportionate to whatever else is going on. If it is designed primarily to punish the Iranian people, to terrorize them or something like that, well, that would be illegitimate. Now, for the Iranians, they don't seem to have any moral compunction or any concerns about the international laws of armed conflict. For example, they were targeting the financial district of Riyadh. I can't find any military purpose in that. That is not legit. If you're going after things like water facilities, desalination plants, stuff like that, you're really pushing any rational that it's tied to a military purpose. And really, if you look at it, what the Iranians do and certainly attacking Israel, but attacking all the Arab states, the Gulf states, is they're trying to terrorize the people, terrorize their regimes, and put a high degree of pain on the people of those countries and their economies. So that is not a legitimate target under international law. So with that said, what could happen the night of Tuesday, April 7th? Well, we could see our targeting power plants. Again, as long as it's got a legitimate military purpose. Bridges. With that said, some things, it could be bridges that are difficult to separate from roads, but dealing with lines of communication, Usually that would be bridges. Airports could be targeted, seaports, oil facilities, energy infrastructure. That's already been talked about. It could be targeted. And you don't necessarily have to take out all this stuff, the traditional destroyed concept. There are things that we've done before. For example, I believe there's a fiber optic cable bomb that we've used before. Is my recollection, and I think it was used in Kosovo and Serbia, that it drops a filament on a power station and the station just shorts itself out. And the station goes out for a period of time until they can fix it. And it does make a pretty dramatic statement. And it seemed to make a pretty dramatic statement in Serbia when that was happening. So that's one of the things that could be done. Obviously, ballistic missile sites, drone sites, these are places we've already been hitting. Command and control targets. There may be some leadership targets. You may have just seen in the news that the Israelis took out the intelligence chief for the Revolutionary Guard Corps. There could be other senior targets. Those are legitimate command and control targets under international law. And of course, anything tied to the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the besieged militia, all of these are things that would probably be targeted. Now, one of the things I think at this point in the conflict is we're really looking at Iran's regular army, the regular military, the Artesh. This is not that, that ideological, radical extreme like the Revolutionary Guard Corps and the besieged militia. This is the more secular military, the more secular police forces as well that are simply there. They're not ideologically tied to the regime. And there's always been thought that at some point, enough stress in the system could cause them to sort of break with the regime and side with the people if there was ever the circumstances were to happen where that could occur. There are reports, that the Artesh is experiencing significant operational challenges, logistical challenges. There are reports that they're short of ammo, food, water, medical support, especially some of their more forward units out there, and that this is causing a lot of stress, and there are some localized desertions of military personnel. There are reports of tensions with the Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is always interesting, something to pay attention to, but there isn't a whole lot more of that, but some of that is over supplies and medical assistance that has complicated operations. There is discussion of possibility of defection, surrender, and that's something that we're always looking at, is to see if they want to lay down their arms or do something like that. And the regular army has not engaged, has not had widespread desertions that we can tell, but there are some localized things that indicate stress points, if you will, across the Artesh, and something that maybe that we pay attention to, like anecdotal reports that some units are handing weapons to anti-regime protesters or elements. Now, that's kind of the backdrop. One of the things that's kind of shaken, at least according to CIA Director Ratcliffe, has shaken the regime, has embarrassed the regime, is this amazing rescue effort of two F-15E aircrew. The F-15E was downed by enemy fire, as near as we could tell, late last week on Friday. That would be October 4th, I believe, and April 4th. And the rescue of the F-15 crew was a series of pretty amazing things. They got the pilot out pretty fast with combat search and rescue. A couple of the Black Hawk helicopters involved were taken under fire. There was reports that U.S. service members were injured in that rescue effort. But then there was a backseater on the F-15. And I should mention they have two air crew, the pilot and what's called the WISO, or the weapons systems officer. Well, when they punch out, when they eject, the pilot goes first, and then about 1.5 seconds later, the WISO will punch out. Now, if that plane is flying fast, which they usually are, that means you can have some significant separation between the two air crewmen as they came down. The WISO came down, an Air Force colonel, pretty senior for a WISO. I'm not quite sure. I think there's going to be more information out there on why this colonel was flying in the back seat, but they came down. He reportedly was injured, I believe probably in the landing, and he was bleeding. but he was able to patch himself up, get contact with search and rescue forces, and somehow either he decided or they led him to moving away from the populated areas up into the mountains, where he went up to around 7,000 feet altitude and eventually hid himself in a rocky crevasse or crevice somewhere where he was able to basically hide but somehow maintain contact. And this was truly one of the most amazing search and rescue efforts I've ever heard, and one of the most amazing military operations I've ever heard of. Now, the CIA was apparently heavily involved in this, not just gathering intelligence on where he is, but also building an elaborate deception campaign to mislead the Iranian forces away from where he was, make them think he was somewhere else, make them think that his disposition was something different than what it actually was. And they did a lot of bombing in the area, again, apparently tied to that deception campaign to make the Iranians think that he was somewhere that he wasn't. And all of this was so that search and rescue personnel, reportedly SEAL Team 6 was involved with this, could get in there, and they rescued him and they got him out. Now, this was over 200 miles into Iranian territory. The way that they did it involved landing two M8 or MC-130s that landed. Apparently, they landed, but the ground was still kind of wet and soft. The sand was soft. And while they were doing all this, the wheels sunk down and they offloaded. They say there were 3 small birds, MH6 small birds as they call them, from the 60th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and that they would fly the special operators and possibly, I don't know, I think we'll find out if there were Air Force pararescue that were with them as well. And they went in, got closer, got him out, brought him back. The problem was the planes had sunk down the sand. So whereas they landed, they couldn't take off. And then they had to make a tough decision. So they brought a couple of other planes. They got them out of there. And then they destroyed the 2 MC-160s, and at least 1, maybe 2 of the helicopters were destroyed as well to stop the Iranians from gathering their stuff. And they got him out of there. And this is truly an amazing, obviously very costly, but an amazing rescue. A A-10 Warthog close air support ground attack plane was damaged during this overall operation. The pilot managed to fly the plane out of Iranian territory, and then he bailed out and was recovered as well. But nobody was killed. It's just stunning. And they got everybody out of there. I just think that's amazing. And you can see why the CIA director would say that, the regime is somewhat embarrassed, because apparently, like as you would expect, they did a full court press to try and capture this airman because they would use him for propaganda purposes, and it just didn't happen for him. All right, now we have this looming deadline. What's Iran going to do? Well, they're probably going to retaliate. Probably more ballistic missiles, more drones. I'm sure they will try to do any type of terrorist type of attack, although in that case, I would consider it more hybrid warfare, not really terrorism per se, anything out there. So you may see a distinct shift this week. I also have a feeling that you might see some of the Persian Gulf countries actually decide to weigh in. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have both expressed some level of interest on some level, informal or formally, that they may enter hostilities here, particularly because the Strait of Hormuz is shut, which is crippling them economically. And so you may see their forces actually enter into this conflict formally. However, I expect that they will see incoming drones and missiles coming from Iran. And at first, they're going to have to fend those off as best they can. The same thing. Interesting internal issue was happening in Iran. Another statement was read that was supposedly from Mojtaba Khomeini. The Iranians put some sort of weird AI video together, making it look like Mojtaba Khomeini, the new supreme leader, was walking into a war room or a combat operations center or something to take charge of the war. But you look at it and you go, that doesn't look real, and it wasn't. It was all AI generated. The thing is, nobody's seen or heard of him. Nobody knows if he's alive. The speculation is that he's incapacitated in some ways. He was seriously injured in the same attack, the strikes that killed his father. And it could be that the Revolutionary Guard Corps is maintaining this elaborate lie to make it sound like he's a supreme leader, when in fact he may have died from those wounds. We just don't know. Nobody's seen him. And the fact that they're using AI stuff to make people believe that he's still alive kind of reinforces the assessment that he is not in any physical shape, or possibly any shape, to actually be the supreme leader. So there's a lot of questions there as to what is his status. And obviously the opposition is going to be looking at that. Now, one of the problems with the opposition in Iran historically, and this is something by design, this is what the regime has been doing for the last 47 years, is keep them fractured, keep them separated. And they've done a pretty good job of fracturing the opposition, which makes it difficult for a regime overthrow. All right. And for the foes who are protesting in December or January, January, they say over 40,000 may have been killed, 30,000 in January. They are afraid that they're going to face the same fate if they go out in the streets now that they faced back in January. I think things have changed, but I would say this. I also think the regime is far more desperate than it was in January too, if you can believe that. However, there are other parts of this whole thing. As the regime loses its grip, the Kurdish area, the Baluchis, the Azeris, and possibly others may separate out as separatist groups trying to carve out their own autonomous territory in the regions that they dominate in the country. Reports are that we tried to get weapons to the protesters via the Kurds, and the Kurds may have intercepted a lot of the stuff that we were trying to get over there. So not all the weapons or stuff that we were trying to get to the protesters in the streets of Tehran or whatever got there. And so there's a bit of a challenge there. The protesters, if they were armed, would obviously stand a better chance of surviving whatever the Baluchi or the besieged militia and the Revolutionary Guard Corps might try to do them on the streets. Yes, this is tough stuff. All right, these are not necessarily going to be peaceful protests by any means. The regime is facing an existential crisis, and they clearly would have no compunction about killing tens of thousands of Iranian citizens if they felt that might keep them in power. The question is, if they start doing that, will that be enough to sway the Artesh? Maybe not the top leadership of the Artesh, the regular military, but maybe the rank and file and some of the junior officers would certainly look at this and say, look, they're killing our families, our friends, and so it might change. It could lead to a rather interesting thing where if there's no oil exports, if we were to say seize Karg Island or stop oil exports from Karg Island, if there's no power that's running in the country, the lights are out at night. So you have a regime in power that literally has no power. I know that sounds kind of strange, but it would be kind of an odd thing. You'd have this autocratic, horrific regime that is almost like a zombie regime because they can't really export anything in terms of export violence to other countries. They can launch some ballistic missiles and drones, but that will obviously diminish over time. There's no income coming to the country. Eventually, they won't be able to pay their own people. They can't pay their people. Their people cannot afford to buy necessary things like food for their families. And you're just going to have this sort of zombie regime that may not be able to be kicked out anytime real soon, but are still there. All right. Also this week, the forces are in place, U.S. forces are in place, that they could do amphibious landings. I think the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit might be very, very close. I think part of this delay has been to make sure that they are on scene with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, so that if there was some sort of island campaign in the Strait of Hormuz or even going up to Kark Island, that those forces would be there. Also, the 1st Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division is reportedly there, and then a lot of special operations troops. And we just saw that, SEAL Team 6 was reportedly involved with this rescue effort. So there's just a lot of capabilities that are there on the ground to do a lot of things. Many things are asymmetric things. So what could happen this week is you could see this emergence of heavily armed extremists clinging to power, but essentially being this force that they can't quite get rid of right away, but they are sort of the walking dead. They're the zombie force that they're not going to go anywhere. There's no way they're going to survive what's happening, but they're just going to be there for a period of time. That's a distinct possibility, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of. And I do believe that they are extreme enough that when they say that they are a bunch of suicidal maniacs, that's not really that far a stretch. They may never be able to really come to a meaningful agreement with the U.S. or any other country on these core points, because they would see that as basically to walk away from what the regime has been about for almost 5 decades. So I think that's going to be a big problem that they have. Anyway, we shall soon know which way this war is going. I don't believe the U.S. is going to stay engaged at this level forever and ever. I think when the president came out and said 2 to 3 weeks, I think that probably was meaningful. You don't not necessarily tell your enemy that you're going to be there for a set amount of time unless you have something in mind that you're going to do to them, which will basically eviscerate them and make it impossible for them to do those things that they want to keep doing. And I think that may be the plan that has been put together for this week. I don't know specifics. I do know that we don't want anybody to know specifics. We definitely don't want the Iranians to have any idea what will happen next. And kind of like that deception plan you saw with rescuing the Air Force colonel, I think you're going to see us mislead. One of the things President Trump seems to have no problem with is using strategic deception and operational deception in these things and playing a role, an active role in that deception campaign. He's obviously been involved with these things more than once, and we certainly have seen this almost, I hate to say it, almost Hollywood theater sort of thing, that he goes out there and does these deception things and then turns around and does something very different. So I think we're going to see more of that too. Thanks for listening to Strat. Also, please visit stratpodcast.com, and you can also go to my YouTube channel, Hal Kempfer TV, or you can visit my corporate website at www.gripsa, that's for Global Risk Intelligence Planning, GRIPSA, and you can also occasionally pick up some of my things or encore performances or sometimes a live webinar with the Los Angeles InfraGard, and their website is infraguardlosangeles.org, and we have some things coming up soon. So thanks, and hope you listen to the next one.